As we all know, climate change is not really happening. It's just a big lie to get more taxes out of us. See, I've been doing a bit of research, and it turns out that what happened was a few years ago, Al Gore bribed 2,000 top climate scientists from around the world to tell a massive lie that the planet's warming up dangerously fast. Then he bribed the thousands of scientists who've been peer reviewing their work, and he also put some big stones under the sea to make it rise a bit and warmed it up by pouring tea in it. Yeah, then he went and persuaded all the polar bears in the Arctic to start hiding ice so that he could pretend it was all melting. Apparently, Philip Pullman introduced him to the king of the bears, Hello,
I'm Al Gore. Are you Eoric?
Notice that the temperatures stay steady, warm up, cool off, and warm up again. And that the solar energy through the solar cycles is absolutely in concert with the temperatures. And what has happened with the burning of fossil fuels doesn't seem to have a thing to do with it.
Well, with us now, Professor Bob Watson, whom you saw in that report. He's the Chief Scientific Advisor to DEFRA and Professor of Environmental Sciences at East Anglia. We're joined from central London by Professor Fred Singer from the University of Virginia. This looks bad, doesn't it, when scientists are using words like trick and hiding things? It looks bad. You agree there?
Absolutely, yes. It's just the use of language was very, very loose. And the word trick almost implies to some people we're trying to fool them. In reality, it's a mathematical approach to how to analyse very complex data.
Well, then why use that kind of language?
This was an email exchange between fellow scientists, and I think it was just very loose language, and I think those scientists will indeed remember in the future not to be so loose in their use of the English language.
Professor Singer, I hope you can hear us all right there in central London, but I mean, I went on this website and trawled through all these emails. I found it very hard to find anything interesting, let alone anything controversial. You've picked out one or two words out of context completely, haven't you?
Well, to us, the basic issue is to decide the cause of climate change. Is it man-made or is it natural? And that will determine the policy. But this can only be decided on the basis of evidence. You have to look at the data. The models are useless because the models all predict the same thing. The models are too simple. They cannot capture the real complexity of the atmosphere.
So when
we look at the...
Yeah, go on.
When we look at the actual evidence, we conclude that the cause of climate change is primarily natural. Of course, there must be some human effect, but it's too small to be noticed. It's insignificant.
There's a group of skeptics meeting here in Copenhagen in order to sort of counterbalance that main conference that's going on. And part of that group that's meeting has laid down the gauntlet to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the UN's Ban Ki-moon. And they're saying if you say that the world is warming because of man-made factors, then prove it. You say that the glaciers are melting, prove it. You say that the sea levels are going to rise, prove it using the science that you have come up with, and we will counter that with our science. Now, for more on the science behind climate change and all that involves, I'm joined by Professor Cliff Ollier. Thanks very much for coming. He's an expert on ice caps and glaciers from the University of Western Australia. Now, Professor Ollier, all around Copenhagen, I don't know if you've seen them yet, but there are red flashing lights, and they're supposed to represent the levels that the sea will reach if the UN's predictions come true. But you say that theory is flawed. Could you explain that for us?
Well, I think so, and this is really why I'm here. I haven't seen all these signs, but now, especially since the world's been getting cooler since '98, the big thrust is rising sea levels. That's the best scale around. And it is tied to the melting of ice caps in particular. And it's based, I believe, on a false model, which I think I can explain very simply. The idea put forward by the alarmists is that the glaciers slide down to the sea, slide on their belly, lubricated by meltwater. And if we make things warmer, we'll get more meltwater and they'll slide ever faster, and we can reach a tipping point and catastrophic meters and meters, depending on who you're talking to, there have been 20 meters, there have been 2 meters. And this is, in fact, we can't calculate it, but it's not the way glaciers really work. And this is what I'm going to be talking about in our conference. The idea of the glacier sliding on its belly was invented in 1779, and in 1845 it was totally disproved, and they knew what they'd done and they understood it, and since then there have been many more advances, but the alarmists are sticking to this 1779 idea of sliding.
The issues that wasn't just barely mentioned, but I think is actually essential to why we're here, and is the fact that, as you know, if we're going to deal with climate change, we, society, are going to deal with climate change, we're talking about spending trillions of dollars. Now, maybe it's hundreds of billions, maybe trillions, but in that range. And if we're going to spend that many resources, we have to be very clear that we're doing it effectively. And climate change has brought a new agenda to us in the world, but we have other important unfinished agendas, and the international health agenda is one of the major ones. Whatever your definition of a sustainable planet is, and maybe our definition of a sustainable planet does include no climate change, or very little, but it also does not include 9 million children dying, and 500,000 women dying in childbirth, and so on, or maybe 40% of children in some countries becoming obese. We have an unfinished health agenda in both, particularly the developing world, but also the developed world. And so, can we tap some of that money that's going to be spent on climate change in effective ways to actually achieve our other agendas? And then this set of papers shows that you can. Now, it's not true with everything. Some things will have almost no effect on health. Some things that aren't talked much about in these papers will have a negative effect on health, things to deal with climate change. Taxes were mentioned. Well, one of the reasons fossil fuel taxes are not in there is because they, unless it's accompanied with ways to help the poor, are likely to make health worse in many populations, fossil fuel taxes, while they may be part of the solution in trying to reduce fossil fuel consumption.
The most obvious place you feel it is in your power bills. Most obviously electricity, but also gas, because it impacts on gas as well. But it will affect everything, the price of everything.
But some, like economist Terry McCrann, believe our efforts are a waste of time.
China and the United States, the two biggest emitters, are not going to go down this path, and indeed China is going to build dozens of new coal-fired power stations over the next few years.
And he's not the only one.
We have nothing to fear from global warming.
Thank God for global warming.
Have we been duped?
There is actually no real evidence at all that CO2 is going to fry us all up.
Now there's a familiar face. Cast your mind back 25 years, if you can, and you'll notice this guy made the news every night. They were tumultuous times. Renowned botanist and environmentalist David Bellamy was instrumental in stopping Tasmania's Gordon below Franklin Dam.
To exclude a citizen of any country from a site which is on the UNESCO World Heritage Register and hence has been afforded international protection can do nothing but harm to the international reputation of Australia.
I lived here as a kid.
A quarter of a century on, 76-year-old Bellamy is back on the world stage.
There was Bob Brown, there was Dick Smith.
But the battle to save Tasmania's southwest wilderness is nothing to the war he is now raging.
I can't believe how the whole world's been taken on in this way. Let's get some truth into the whole thing.
Quite simply, Dr. Bellamy believes weather is cyclical. We have warm periods, we have cold periods, and dramatic temperature and climatic occurrences like El Nino happened long before the internal combustion engine began spewing out carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It's one of the most important gases that keeps the whole world in kilter.
In fact, even if the world does get a bit warmer, and he argues it isn't, it won't be such a bad thing.
If the CO2 does go up in the atmosphere and the temperature went up just a little bit more, then of course we could start growing crops all over Siberia.